Okay, Dr. Mamadou Bodian is a researcher in the social studies lab of the Institut Fondamental d'Afrique Noire IFAN, Cheikh Anta Diop, University of Dakar. He is the coordinator for Fulbright Fellows in West Africa at the West Africa Research Center, WARC. He received his PhD from the University of Florida and is a founding member of the Sahel Research Group, SRG. Over the past decade, Dr. Bodian has conducted extensive field research across the Sahel. In 2008, he served in Senegal as a senior researcher of the Islam Research Program, a project funded by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs and led by the University of Leiden, in collaboration with the Netherlands Embassy in Senegal. Dr. Bodian was also a researcher in the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Sahel and West Africa program. Dr. Bodian has been acting as an expert for Freedom House, Mali, since 2015, Variety of Democracy since 2015 in Mauritania, and Afrobarometer, Senegal, since 2018. His research has focused on religion, democracy, and security issues in the Sahel region of Africa. He published the results of his research in various formats and has given numerous presentations in academic venues and to policy audiences. He is a co-author of the book Entre le savoir et le culte, activisme et mouvement religieux dans les universités du Sahel. All right, Professor Sen, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You can
Jola. Well, Jola, do you know that your name will correspond to the name of an ethnic group around here? So when you come, please make sure that Dr. Mamadou Bodian gives you some background on his ethnic group. And that ethnic group is written exactly in the same way as your name, Jola, except here it's a diphthong. It is longer, Jola, right? And it will tell you about the celebrated heroine of the Jola people, Aline Sitoye Diatta, who, in terms of post-colonialism, as the topic is today, would be interested to study, but that will be another topic. Yours, or the topic to be discussed here, being making sense of a post-colonial landscape in West Africa. The title has zeroed on West Africa. And actually, when you talk about post-colonialism, most people will think about the countries which were colonies until the independence or until the end of the Second World War. That's why actually many of the theoreticians of post-colonialism come from those countries. India is replete with people who are specialists of theories of post-colonialism, as well as African. But when we think about human history, there have always been communities, parts of the world, which were under the domination of, which were colonized. You cannot talk about the Roman Empire unless you think about nations, communities, lands, territories, which were under the domination of the all-powerful Roman Senate and Roman people. Just like, you know, the ruling people in Egypt, symbolized by Pharaoh, had territories which were under their domination. And if you look at a colony which gained independence maybe 200 years before Africa or somewhere around, well, it was a colony. America, the United States, was a colony. That's why you have a war of independence, and that's why you have all the movements which illustrated the need for the American people to forge their identity by getting rid of the British colonial forces and by looking at themselves and asking themselves, who are we now? Who are we going to be after we got freed from the British, from the English? So all these are things to be considered in connection with post-colonial. And really, I will wrap up my broad consideration on this by reminding you that it is just because there was post-colonial era that the American needed to shape the American mind and the American identity. Go to any American writers, particularly the earlier one and the classic, the notion of local color was there in order to distinguish American literature, American fiction from British fiction. You cannot imagine the river Mississippi and the Red Indians flourishing in a novel written by, I don't know, E.M. Foster or Graham Greene or those writers. They have to be American, and they forge the American identity by redefining America with things pertaining to America, understood, described by people positioning themselves as Americans and no longer the foreign, discriminating or distorting eye of the colonizer. So that process also is reminiscent of what happened in Africa, because post-colonialism has got to be understood like that. It's being the critical academic study of a cultural, political, and economic legacy of colonialism and imperialism, focusing on the impact of human control and exploitation of colonized people and their lands. The field started to emerge in the 60s. I told you it is in the 60s that most African countries gained independence, including here, Senegal. Ghana, it was a little bit earlier, 2 years earlier. Ethiopia was never conquered, even if the Italian influence and the Italian presence could be felt, so etc., etc. So the field started to emerge in the 60s as scholars from previously colonized countries, Homi Baba and all those people, began publishing on the lingering effect of colonialism, developing a critical theory analysis of the history, culture, literature, and discourse of usually European imperial power. That's the definition. Now, the purpose of the study, studying post-colonialism, having theories, so we will just zoom in on that, and maybe I will make a few remarks before leaving the floor to you, Alion and Mamadou Boja. Boja. So purpose and basic concepts as an epistemology, that is to say, a study of knowledge, its nature and verifiability, ethics, moral philosophy, and as a political science, that is, it is concerned with affairs of the citizenry. The field of post-colonialism addresses the matters that constitute the post-colonial identity of a decolonized people, which derives from the colonizer's generation of cultural knowledge about the colonized people, and second, how that Western cultural knowledge was applied to subjugate a non-European people into a colony of a European mother country, which after initial invasion was affected by means of the cultural identities of colonizer and colonized. Postcolonialism is aimed at disempowering such theories, intellectual and linguistic, social and economics, by means of which colonialists perceive, understand, and know the world. Postcolonial theory thus establishes intellectual spaces of subaltern peoples to speak for themselves. Subaltern people to speak for themselves in their own voice, and thus produce cultural discourses of philosophy, language, society, and economy, balancing the imbalance us and them binary power relationship. This is very, very accurate. Them and us, or us and them, binary power relation between the colonialists and the colonial subject. And in that respect, you know, a few writers and a few books come to mind. One of them, Albert Memmi, Portrait du colonisé, Portrait of the colonized. Like Wise, you have Franz Fanon, Black Mask, White Skin. No. Black Skin, White Mask. You have also the theories of Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. You have many other writings, including Ngugi's essays on, you know, decolonizing the mind, etc. All these are documents which can help. And you have the famous theory of the center and the theory. Everything significant is supposed to be culled and to be derived from Europe, from European culture, civilization, and religion, and all the rest is peripheral, has to be neglected, because everybody should be absorbed by, you know, the European canon of standard values. So post-colonial thinking, writing, etc., are here in order to correct the picture and make of a world a more balanced location where the erstwhile, the formerly colonized, can join the center and, you know, describe themselves, show themselves as they are and as they should have been always portrayed. So I think we should suffice for introductory notes. Without further ado, I am going to pass the bucket to Dr. Mamadou Bojang for further clarification. And thank you, Jola, for listening.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, Professor Sen, for this brilliant intro, and I think it sets the floor. So I'm going to be talking about post-colonialism from a political science perspective. And as you mentioned, post-colonialism involves many fields of study, and I think it's a kind of crossroad of disciplines. It's trying to shed light on one dimension of this lingering effect of colonialism as you depicted it. And I think this expression is kind of catchy. It's interesting. And obviously, many West African countries, but I'm going to be focusing on West Africa, was colonized. But of course, before colonialism, they also experienced other forms of political systems, kingdoms, but also other political systems whereby people manage their daily life, but also their current affairs. It's different from what the colonial power established, a new state with institutions, but also a form of organization that allows people to compete at some point. But I think something interesting that worth mentioning, especially when we talk about colonialism in relation to politics, it's the way colonial, the colonies was administered. And I think one of them being two types of policies or politics. We know, for example, that the British colonies have been colonized differently. And usually when we talk about British colonies, we also refer to what is commonly known as indirect rule, where local leaders and communities are get involved in the administration process. But this pattern is different in West Africa or in Francophone Africa, particularly, where the direct rule kind of policy have been applied. And this supposes that colonies has to be assimilated with the colonial power. And all the institutions that have been put in place were designed in a way that transform colonial people to become somehow French in some way. But the state itself that had been inherited from the colonial administration also reproduce this kind of yes.
Let me come back. Thank you.
Okay.
Chola, I see you later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So the state itself bear this kind of trademark of the colonial power. But I'm going to be emphasizing different steps in the evolution of African countries to at least during the post-colonial period, because we inherited from states, but the nation itself has been weakened by the fact that different communities living in different parts of the country because of these colonial boundaries have been divided. And this has created a lot of tensions, especially in the early years of independence. As a result, we've seen, for example, some minority groups that have been completely isolated from the main group, which is kind of occupied, which is living in a different country, has created some kind of tensions, especially when those minority are separated and put in a country where they have another majority group. So, and I'm going to be focusing on three, at least, time frames to explain or to understand African post-colonial politics. And as I mentioned, I'm going to be focusing on West Africa, and particularly Francophone West Africa. These are the where I'm more familiar, right? So one of the first step was what I can consider to be the down of high nationalism following independence, and this is the result of a transformative years between 1950 and 1960, where many West African countries experience a profound metamorphosis, emerging from the shadows of the colonial into the light of independence. But this period was also marked by a high nationalism, a time when the aspiration for self-determination, but also unity and progress were at its zenith. So, and liberated from the constraint of foreign rule, many of these countries embark in a sort of journey to redefine their places in the world, but also crafting identities and institutions. And this struggle for self-determination can be somehow revolve around different aspects, and one of them being what I call the surge of national identity. And this is particularly the quest for an identity that fits the new independent state, but also a sort of rejection of this kind of the colonial label right? But a profound search for cultural revival and affirmation. And as you can see in many countries, including Senegal, right, this took the form of a cultural renaissance where local languages and traditions have been valued and art started also flourishing. The national symbols, Athens, flags were crafted to encapsulate the essence of each nation's spirit, signaling also the rebirth of a sort of indigenous identity. And the second dimension, which is also very important, is economic autonomy and development challenges. And as you know, many countries, when they took independence, were highly, fragilized by the fact that they didn't enjoy the strong infrastructure that allows them to build strong economies. And this economic dependence was a cornerstone of this area, where country sought to break away from the economic model imposed by the colonial power, which often prioritized extraction and exportation of raw material to the detriment of local economy. Of course, there's been initiatives aimed to diversifying economies, but also promoting industrialization or increasing sufficiency. But this kind of initiative was kind of limited because of, and we can see some various successes. Of course, Ghana have embarked in this area, but also Nigeria, which has been, one of the leading figures, leading countries in West Africa. But in Francophone Africa, the picture is a little bit mixed. Even though there's been an attempt by the first independence leaders to foster economic development by trying some sort of industrialization, but some countries get caught in the economic model set by the colonial administration, and Senegal is one of them, because we've kind of get stuck in this peanut economy, even though the country tried to diversify its economy, but still during the 1990s, another thing happened when all these Francophone African countries faced difficulties, but also fiscal imbalance, mounting debt, and stagnant growth. And this prompted this structural adjustment programs in partnership with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And this has contributed in weakening political, economic structures, but also weakening the capacity of the state to provide basic services, health, education, but also infrastructure, roads, and to hire civil servants in the administration. Another area where we can see this kind of transformation, post-colonial transformation, is when it's come to political sovereignty and governance. Of course, political independence was the most visible marker of the shift from colonial rule, and the establishment of sovereign government, but also elected by the people. And I think elections have played a very important role. And this has been a monumental step towards self-governance. But still, we've seen the kind of, that this path was fraught with challenges because the colonial legacy has often left behind arbitrary borders that group separate, disparate ethnic groups, as I mentioned earlier, under a single national identity. And this has led to tensions, but also conflict. Even though elections have been one of the main instruments that have been put in place to allow, for example, people to compete, but also to accommodate some people who've been outside the political arena. But most of the challenges was associated with post-colonial, post-electoral kind of disputes. Because sometimes the rule of the game are designed in a way that excludes some people. And I'm going to talk about this later on. But of course, the first initial elections in many Francophone African countries were not free and fair. And And this is one of the reasons why during the 70s, many countries went through a series of military coups. Ghana, Nigeria, but also Francophone African countries, Niger, Mali, Burkina, all these countries experienced military coups in the 70s as a result of many factors, including poverty, but also economic turmoil. But I think the shift started in 1990s, where all these countries embarked in a sort of democratic journey with establishing democratic institutions, allowing political parties to be created, but also creating a framework to allow competition. And one of the main challenge was how to create a democracy that also that goes beyond institutions, right? Elections, multi-party, but also free and fair elections and free press. But how to include values like freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of academic freedom, freedom of religion, but also freedoms of minority, including sexual minorities. And in Muslim majority countries in particular, there's been some kind of tensions and negotiation over a set of issues, including family, how to manage the family, and the family code, for example, debate in Niger, Mali, and Senegal was one of the key driver of politics till today. Of course, there's been some kind of reforms to create an environment that allows, for example, democracy to prosper, but also to become the driver of economic development, but also stability. But today, and I think one of the crises that democracy is facing is accommodating all these demands from people who are disappointed with representative democracy, which means that we elect people who get access to the state apparatus, but are incapable of providing services. And most of the challenges that many African countries are facing, and I'm going to stop there, is how to make sure that people's needs, but also preoccupation are taken into account in different policies. And it seems to me that over the last few years, people are aware of their capacity to change the political fate and trajectory of these countries. And we kind of experiencing a sort of participatory democracy in response to what is considered as a representative democracy, where elected officials can sometimes get access to power positions and some are sometimes involved in mismanagement, in corruption, leaving people with their faith. So and today, and I think there's been some kind of reforms as a result of pressure from below, but also as a kind of the new involvement of the military is also questioning the strength of our democracy, but it also signaled the necessity to move to further reform that can consolidate our democracies. So this is what I wanted to say in intro, and I'll just stop there and open maybe the floor to open the door to discussions.
Yeah. Yes, Yola. So do you have any questions or comments? We have a little bit less than 10 minutes, but we're welcome to take any
Okay,
questions.
sorry. I was
Yeah.
muted.
Yeah.
Do I have any questions? I don't know if I have any questions.
Okay.
I guess can you talk more about like the family policy stuff that you mentioned and how it's still a kind of form of contention in Mali, and I think there was another country that you mentioned,
Niger.
Niger.
Well, over the last few years, there's been a debate over the family code, and this is the result. This is partly the result of how the new democratic institutions shall have were designed, but also how how the negotiation over the design of this institution have been conducted. And in many Francophone African countries, especially Muslim majority countries, these new institutions were designed by a set of Francophone elite, who have tried to pattern those institutions based on what they knew the most. It's the French, the constitution of the French Fifth Republic, which consider our states as democratic but also secular republics. So this means that all these religious concerns have been isolated from the process, and religious leaders didn't participate in the process. And this transition is oftentimes considered an event, but in reality, it was the beginning of a process characterized by tension and negotiation between different actors who have different agendas. And later on, even though religious leaders was kind of reluctant when it comes to getting involved in politics, or at least accepting democracy, because it was considered something, in contradiction with Islam. But later on, they realized that, well, if democracy means the rule of the majority, we are the majority here. So we can just put forward some concerns. And among these is the question of the family, how you organize the family, who should hold the authority in the family, who should decide when it comes to education of kids. And then a debate was started emerging over the paternal authority over the parental authority. So far we've experienced the kind of the paternal authority, which means that the man or men are the one who call the tune when it comes to taking decisions in the family. And the fact that all these leftist organization, but also female organization, started voicing concern over all this discrimination that women, especially in the family, are facing. This has resulted in the draft of some kind of laws that have been passed throughout history, especially in Senegal. It was the first one was passed in the 70s. And it was considered very progressive because it also gave women a lot of strength when it's come to taking decisions, even though there's been some kind of limitations, right? When it's come to applying those kind of the rule. But later on, religious leaders in Mali and Niger as well, right, decided to challenge all these family code that had been drafted in the early 70s and 80s. And in Senegal, the debates was sparked in 2000 and 2001, I guess, when a group of religious actors and other parliamentarians decided to change this constitutional amendment by introducing this code, of course, not the constitution, but the code, to introduce what they call l'autorité du père to make decisions, but also to limit. And this is a response to a debate that had been raised by female organizations over l'autorité parentale. So for them, parents should decide and not the father. And we had the same debate in Mali in 2009, and the National Assembly drafted a law and passed it, and the law was submitted to the president. But he faced so much pressure that he decided to return the code for a second reading. And this is the result of a pressure from religious leaders. So we can see how this has evolved. And there are also many other issues, including, for example, the secular nature of the state. The concept of laïcité, which has been debated since the 1990s, is still going on. And Niger in 1990s was forced at some point by some actors to remove the concept of laïcité from the constitution, and instead they suggested a non-confessional state. In Senegal and Mali, the debate is still going on. So we can see how this kind of inherited colonial values or system is being questioned by some actors, particularly religious leaders, in this context where our countries are experiencing some kind of transition where religion is playing a very important role.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, I think that was the only question I had was about the family, was about the question of family.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I think, yeah, I did. I think I have answered the question.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Bodian. Professor Sen had to leave a little bit early, Jola, but we
Okay.
would also like to thank you for showing up and making this Series 5 possible. Yeah, so look forward to the next session.
Okay.
Hopefully we can get to talk to you soon about your own personal research.
Yes.
You know, like you say, shoot an email or come here. I mean, you are in Dakar. You can come visit us anytime. We will see the best way that we can help you out with that. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
John.
See you.
Thanks.
Thanks for showing up. Bye.
Bye-bye.